Welcome to the Property Funder podcast. You're here with me, Michael Dean. I am the host of the show. You can find me on the internet at property_funder, which is why the name of the podcast is the way it is. First of all, many thanks to the show sponsor, Avamore Capital. Avamore Capital is a development and bridging lender based in London, but lending all over England and Wales to SME property developers from projects starting at £250,000 and all the way up to £25 million. And we actually have here today an Avamore client, Richard, who we'll be talking to shortly. Now, before we talk to Richard, let me just remind you as well, if you are a new visitor to the show, thank you very much. Whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or Apple, if you can like and subscribe, give us a 5-star review. That means that more people will have the opportunity to hear from and listen to the best practices and wisdoms of business leaders like Richard, who we've got here today. Now, Richard, thanks for putting up with all that. Could you tell people your full name and the name of your business, and what your business does?
Hi, thanks for this. My name is Richard Stott. I'm the managing director of the Kexgill Group. We trade in the UK as University Quarter. We're basically an investment company. We own and operate in the student market in the UK. In Germany, we have another business, which is Kexgill Immobilien, and there we have multifamily houses. We're a completely private company, no private equity, no external shareholders. Asset value at the moment, gross asset value is about 200 million, which, to be honest, in our sectors feels a bit small. But the difference is it's private. There's nobody else. So that's basically us.
Well, Richard, we were just talking about your two children. Is it two sons?
Yep.
One of your sons is an investment analyst, and the other son is a stand-up comedian. So they're very diverging paths that they've taken. But they very nearly inherited your empire on Friday. So can you tell us about what happened?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I was at UKREiiF this week, which is a brilliant bit of levelling up for the north. It's set up in Leeds, 13,000 people there. Fantastic time. I thought, well, I'm going to escape after that. I'm going to nip off to Faro for a bit of sun because the weather in the UK was pretty rubbish. First night there, I choked, and I was literally had about a minute left before brain damage and 3 minutes left before I was sort of clinically dead, which great news for my wife. She was led away halfway through the episode because it looked particularly bleak. There was a group of nearby diners doing everything they could to keep me alive. And then I was vaguely slipping out of consciousness and thinking, oh, this is a rubbish way to die. I'm never going to see my first grandchild. And a shout came up for medics, and unbelievably, 2 traveling medics from Liverpool came in, saved me. And a bit of a life-changing moment. Quite shocking, cost me a fortune in buying everybody in the restaurant a drink because they were all equally as sort of traumatized as I was. And yeah, it was a bit life affirming. Life's precious, and don't die in a bit of a stake, and learn the Heimlich manoeuvre. Really learn that, because the 8 guys were trying to keep me alive and they couldn't, and they didn't know, unfortunately, what they were doing. I'm learning it. I've gone on YouTube, and that episode nearly died. I've got 8 lives left now, so I'm all right.
Yeah. So what is you choked on the proverbial steak, was it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's only the second mouthful. What a waste!
Oh my goodness!
And it was good. Well, the first mouthful was good.
You must have been very hungry.
I've mentioned this to people, and they've come back. Oh God, yeah, I know such and such who died. I know such and such who lived. And it's kind of a lottery. If you don't do the Heimlich manoeuvre right, you die. And the person who was actually choking, which was me, you can't do anything. You can't fight for your life because there's no air.
Oh my goodness.
So you just stood there as some sort of buffoon while everybody is working on you. And literally, I am so bloody lucky. Peter and Louise, medics from Liverpool, I'll be forever in your debt.
Well, shouts out to Peter and Louise from Liverpool, and you wouldn't be the first of Avamore's clients to pass away whilst in the middle of a loan, but we quite like you, so we quite like you to stay alive, Richard. So we're grateful, definitely grateful to Peter and Louise, and if you've got their contact details, we'll be sure to send them an Avamore gilet as a sign of our gratitude as well.
Spookily enough, I actually bumped into him in the airport going home, and I seeing them was such a shock. All I could do was point, and then they came over. We took a picture, and I said, "Well, how bad was it?" And they said, "Bleak."
Oh, shit.
It was bleak. Oh, really? Yeah, it was bleak. Last minute.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So my wife has thrown the insurance policy away now. She was obviously, that's why they led her away to get on the insurance, but she wasn't. But it was pretty horrible.
Oh my God. Okay. All right. Yeah. Sounds like you need another holiday just to sort of get
That's
over
a good idea. I like that. Yeah. I like that idea.
Anyway, right. Okay. So well, anyway, it's good to have you with us, and it's an absolute pleasure for me to get to know you. I know you've built up a good rapport with Phil and the team, particularly on the student side. So what I wanted to start on was UKREiiF. I've been hearing a lot about it. There's been a lot of news going on. A lot of news. It's gathered momentum quite quickly because there was an attempt to do a kind of UK MIPIM or MIPIM UK, and I don't think it was very successful because it seemed to be just a sort of coagulation of local people from local authorities having a bit of a jolly. Why do you think UKREiiF has been so successful? Obviously, being a Yorkshireman, you're going to be a little bit biased to it because of where it's based, but it does seem to have gathered good momentum, and a lot of people from the property and finance industries have sort of made the effort to go up. Certainly this year more than any other.
It was absolutely brilliant this year. I mean, the weather was awful on the Wednesday. It just rained all day, but I was only there for 2 days. But what it enabled me to do is meet groups of people that I would never get in the same room. I was on a panel talking about student affordability, which was great with the Torsen Group. But I needed to see a local authority, and I needed to see the 4 top people, and they were there. And I met all 4 to talk seriously about futures and investment, etc. I would have never been able to set that meeting up without them already being at REiiF. And it was just good. I mean, I didn't know everybody there, but you kind of walk along and think, oh, I know him, I know that face. And then there was a lot of politicians there, which is good. Yeah, it did feel like a little bit bias leveling up. I've not been to MIPIM, but I used to go to Expo in Munich, and that was we were investing in Germany at the time, and that was very efficient and German and great. And I've always resisted the attempts to go to MIPIM because I'm tight, and I thought we don't want to spend all that money. But UKREiiF, big tick, 13,000 plus people there. What a result.
Yeah, and in addition to, I guess, doing a lot for the hotels, bars, and restaurants of Leeds, there were probably a lot of deals done there at the time, or a lot of new connections built, a lot of old ones reforged. So yeah, sounds to me like it's a good event. I mean, speaking from personal experience, I do like MIPIM, but it's the thing about MIPIM is it's because you've got to fly down there, you feel like you've got to go there for that bit longer, and there's a certain intensity to MIPIM where you need to have a good amount of stamina, from my experience. I mean, I enjoy it. You've got to pace yourself for MIPIM, even though you're in a lovely part of the world, and it's the sun shining when it's often freezing cold back home.
Yeah.
Which obviously is very attractive quality to MIPIM, but you definitely have, because of the intensity of it, if you're not careful, you can end up really burning yourself out after a couple of days. Whereas I think 2 days at UKREiiF, and if you've had enough, or you need to just jump on the train and get home, it's nice to have that option, isn't it? So interesting to hear, and it sounds like it's one of those things that's going to be in the calendar for many more years to come.
Definitely a result, and a real alternative to MIPIN, because if you want to see an entire local authority, or you want to see an entire bank, or who you really want to speak to, they were there, and it was just so easy. Lots of meeting spaces, and for me, I just popped on a train, then popped on the little canal barge, and I thought, wow, this is quite continental to get there. It almost could be MIPIN if it wasn't for the rain and the cold.
It wasn't for the rain, yeah. Unfortunately, Leeds in May, you can't really rely on the weather, but at least everyone keeps everyone focused, and as long as there's enough space for everyone, that works well. While you're at UKREiiF, there was a fairly big announcement, which was the announcement of the general election. Caught a lot of people by surprise. We had a chap called Mike Reeder come on the podcast last year. He's likely to get elected as a Labour MP in Northampton. And I sent him a WhatsApp. I said, "Have you seen the election news?" And I think it even took him by surprise. And he said, "What are you talking about? I'm at UKREiiF." I said, "Well, you might need to leave. Get down to your constituency, because you're gonna have to start campaigning." So yeah, what was the mood when the election was announced? Presumably everyone was taken a little bit by surprise?
Well, I was in a meeting, and so we didn't know until we got out of the meeting, and then yeah, it was a surprise, and I kind of think, well, at least we know something's happening. At least we know I'm not going to be too political, but I have got more political, and I think a lot of people in our business have, over the past 4 or 5 years, had their head the hands over the eyes like this, thinking, what the hell, Liz Truss, really? And I'm not really a political person, but seeing in my business international students politicized when they're bringing in 42 billion a year to the UK and all these trade connections and everything else, and seeing them sort of kind of villainized as they're migrants, and we're going to reduce them, really? You've got an export of education from the universities in the UK. Let's destroy them. And I'm seeing that as a political maneuver wasn't good. There's still things to do, and the result is going to be interesting. I've got I bet every week with my chairman. We've got a bet on Hung and Labour victory. Nobody's bet on a Conservative victory, though. Strangely.
Well, I'm shocked. I mean, I obviously, not knowing your politics, but my politics of historically, I'm a child of Thatcher. My mum was a single mother immigrant coming to the country. She managed to make a really successful life for herself. I've very much been a subscriber to that kind of Thatcherite conservatives. I know conservatism. I know that can be divisive in certain quarters, and I sympathise. I say sympathise, but I understand where people come from who might feel that way. That being said, I'm not going to support a political party the way I support a football team. Just because you put a donkey with it on a blue or a red rosette on a donkey doesn't mean you're going to vote for the donkey, no. So I think in that context, if we look at what the Conservative Party has done, particularly in the last few years, and I include Brexit, how they dealt with COVID, for example, and COVID, I imagine COVID regulations and restrictions would have been absolutely devastating for a lot of student housing operators like yourself. And how that was all managed. I find it very hard to make an argument in favour of the Tories. At the same time, I'm not desperate and falling over myself to vote Labour. I'm sort of find myself, and I think a lot of people of that ilk, of my ilk, will take a very similar view, which is it's sort of spoiled ballot time. It's not one or the other. It's just no one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it has been quite unpleasant the past few years watching disaster after disaster, and really the sort of the people you did respect, the Heseltines, etc. I thought, well, they're not in it anymore. But yeah, Liz Truss was a pinnacle moment in our business. She cost us a lot of money, and we're in the middle of refinancing. That all stopped, and to see the lack of sort of empathy from her, the lack of any understanding of, and that sort of really put me off. And the sort of the far right of the party seem to have split away. And really, Jacob Rees-Mogg, I'm never going to be appearing on GB News. I appreciate that, but yeah, not for me at all.
What do you think? You know, we're going to have a Labour leader. You know, the bookies. If you look at what the bookmakers are saying, you would get very, very long odds on a Conservative government remaining in power. And given the way that the election, you know, I suppose the electioneering has started, and there's been a number of gaffes already by Rishi Sunak and his team. So you'd think that it's gonna take something really spectacular for Labour to not be in government. Given that Labour are going to be in government, what, if anything, do you see changing, and do you think things are going to be easier from your perspective as a business leader?
We sort of very much sort of aligned with the universities, because I mean that's the universities attract students. They come and live with us, and I think that's probably going to be a better call for us with a Labour government. I'm not fearing a Labour government at all. I have watched with increasing despair international students and the way they're demonized. I mean, the Kexgill Group was set up by a first-generation immigrant. I'm surrounded by people who are very good, and they came to the UK. They didn't come to the UK with UK passports. I've just employed the best of the best, and the Chinese national, German national, they're not there because they're immigrants. They're here because they were great, and they needed, and they genuinely contributed to the UK. And seeing that sort of harmed has been difficult, really. And I was never in favour of Brexit. I just wasn't. And we've got a business in Germany, and then very often when I go over there, they say why, and I can't answer them. I can't answer the question.
I mean, I'm of the similar persuasion to you, Richard, but at the same time, I also respect those who feel the opposite. I think though, if you're going to go down the Brexit route, you've got to, there's a certain path you've got to take, and all the sort of quote unquote benefits that you might get from Brexit, I don't think, you know, and again, this is not a political show, but I'm not entirely convinced that since we followed the Brexit path, that we've got the benefits of Brexit. We're sort of in this sort of no man's land where we're not in Europe, but we're doing all the sort of, but we've got all the baggage. We still got all the stuff, that all the regulations, all the things that are unhelpful from being in the EU, but we're not in the EU, so we don't have the benefit of the, you know, the frictionless trade and movement. And as someone who's got business in agriculture, we got Scottish seed potato farmers who've got the best seed in the world, and you've got European potato growers who are desperate for British seed, and they can't get British seed because of Brexit, as just one example, right? So it's one example that I'm aware of. But anyway, we let's not go too far down that rabbit hole. But
yeah,
anyway,
I definitely. I mean, I know people who voted Brexit. They're still friends, and we all have different views, and they have different. But to say it worked, it hasn't worked, and a long process back, really.
We'll see how it plays out. But I think since we've gone Brexit, I think we could have done a lot better than we have. But
agreed.
We will see. We are only, some would argue we're only a few years into the journey. But just a final point on the election. Do you think, you know, the markets hardly moved when the election was announced, and I think it's almost it's almost sort of confirmatory, isn't it? No one in business is particularly scared of Labour like they would have been 5 years ago under Corbyn.
Agreed.
The Tories have taxed us very aggressively. I mean, on the planning front, do you think do you expect it's going to be easier on planning, or to get planning for schemes and projects moving forwards under a Labour government? Do you think Labour are going to be more pro-development? Do you think they're going to be more helpful in certain respects?
Well, I think across the industry, we know the planning system is broken. It's cost us an awful lot of money. We had planning delays. Some things have just not happened. And it seemed to get worse after the pandemic. And I think that's probably as a result of work from home, really. If you're a planner and you're brought in as a new planner, you need to actually sit around a table and say, well, this is a good idea, that's a bad idea, and what do you think about this? You can't do that remotely. And this is not saying there aren't some really brilliant planners in local authorities. There are, but a lot of them have left because they're obviously banging their head against a wall, and they're now planning consultants. And somebody, I think it was Property Week, said how many sort of 15, 16-year-olds dream of being a town planner? Not many. But yet it is a really exciting job. It should be, because you are building the built environment which will last forever, for an awful long time, and outlive you. So should it be exciting? I think it is. But it is. I honestly don't know how they're going to fix it. More people in, yes, that'd help it, but simpler policies, absolutely. And we do need more development, and we need to be working on the affordable route.
I mean, my view is that it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other when it comes to Labour and planning policy. Because I think what I think that they'll do reasonably well is, I think they will be probably reasonably good at the resourcing of planning departments. I think that they will be they will encourage more flexibility. Certainly around design, and a bit less computer says no. But I think where the only thing I worry about on the alternative side is, could they be too aggressive on the environmental and eco front, where they open the door for development and then they put a roadblock straight in front of it as soon as you've walked through it, because you then have to do fill in the blank new BAT survey, or net neutrality, or this, that, and the other. I'm obviously speculating a little bit, but that's my only reservation, is that they sort of shoot themselves a little bit in the foot just when they're trying to get going on the planning side.
As far as I can see, we've got that now. I'm just
dealing
with a BAT survey, and I'm told if I don't instruct it this month, it's the last month I can instruct it.
You missed the boat for a year, don't you? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And the amount of reports that I've got, and the expense of getting these reports, and then you get nothing back from the planners, and then the consultants say, well, we can actually do a quick report, but it's twice as much, or we can do a long report. And God, I really want this planning. So you pay more money for the report, and then the planners don't do anything for 3 months or 4 months. So I may as well just wait. It is extremely frustrating, and I think we've got all that now.
I mean, speaking from my own personal experience, I want to make a PD application on a building I've got in Staines, and I say our family's got, and because it's sort of in a sort of low risk flood zone, sort of 1 in 1,000 years type scenario. So we've got to have a flood risk assessment as part of the application. Now, it just so happens, disappointingly, that the specialist consultant who has to sort of do the assessment and then, suggest the mitigation has been very unavailable of late. But it does beg the question. It's like, well, right, okay, so it's very obviously not a location that floods. There's buildings all over the shop that have been there for hundreds of years in some cases. Why can't we just go on and do the conversion without having to worry about it? That raise the bar to have to provide a flood risk assessment and make it easier for me. On the other hand, we've got a development which we had an application in for 31 resi units for, I suppose, exec homes in West Berks. West Berks as a local authority effectively bust. They can't throw any resource at it. The officer decided to refuse the application, not because for grounds that we could have worked around. We could have said, okay, well, just give us the feedback. We'll make the adjustments we need to make to it, and then we can move forwards. But because they don't want to spend any more time on the application, they've refused it, and they've effectively kicked the can down the road so that the planning inspector has to deal with it. And you look at that situation, you go, well, how is that good use of public resources? You've got much needed housing that could be going in. It's it's enabling. There's a good enabling argument for it. It's going to create homes. It's going to create, it's going to enhance the community. But all you're doing is you're just slowing down the process, and you're just kicking the can. You're basically robbing Peter to pay Paul, because you're just taking. You're not going to spend the money in the resource in local government. You're just going to spend the money in the resource in central government. But who's benefiting from this? No one. It's madness.
I utterly feel your pain, and it has resulted in us doing less conversions, less development. The development we've got on at the moment all could have been completed a year ago. If they were completed a year ago, there'd been a term loan which would be cheaper. Interest rates have gone up since then. And who's benefited? Absolutely nobody. And we've pulled back on 2 planning applications because they're just sat there. They've been sat there for over 18 months. You've got 3 months to actually make the decision, but nobody's been punished for not doing the job. It just hasn't happened. And every time you send another report, it gets batted back, and eventually another 3 months tapped in, and then you get another question. It's not good. It really isn't good, and it's not good for creating jobs, creating affordable living, doing all the things that make us good at what we do, and we're just held back, and it's massively frustrating. You felt the pain, and we're feeling the pain.
Yeah, and I think this is there's a misconception that people in property developers are, this sort of cigar chomping, pinstripe barons. At the end of the day, we provide whether you're in property finance, whether you're in strategic land, or whether you're in actual delivery and an operation of real estate assets, we ultimately provide important housing infrastructure, whether that's C3, C4, C2 use. We're providing important housing infrastructure for people to live in, and I think that sometimes people forget that this is housing is infrastructure, and the more expensive you make housing, the less money that there is in the economy for other things. One of the reasons why we can't innovate, we can't have innovative companies, or as many innovative companies, or why companies have to leave the UK once they get to a certain size and scale, is because we spend too much money in this country on mortgages and rent. And why is that? It's because there's not enough housing stock available for people to live in, one way or the other. What do you think about when people talk about land banking and they accuse developers of land banking? Do you think that's a fair assessment for some of the larger house builders, or do you think that actually
it's not an accusation? I think it's unfair. I mean, if they could build it out and flip it and turn it over and put it back in the economy, they'd do it. But you're going to land bank it if the cost of building has got to a point, the planning delays have got to a point. You've got no choice but to land bank it. We see the cyclical nature of property. We're in a sort of a point where it's sort of just plateauing, really. I'm not seeing massive falls in value. And clearly retail's had a massive fall, and some of the peaky sheds have sort of peaked at very small yields. But you're not seeing people who are land banking, and you're seeing people breaking out of options to buy. If they've got an option to leave the option, they've left the option. So I think it's it's not that market at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I still think that there's a real misunderstanding, particularly at a political level. You know, when they talk about greedy developers, land banking, I don't, you know, if the planning system was easier, if it wasn't so difficult to actually get a consent, it didn't cost so, you don't have to spend the best part of £2 or £3 million as a national house builder to get a consent for 200 or 300 houses. You'd get on and you'd build much quicker because the land would be cheaper. You know, and I think there's just these misconceptions. They do need to be busted, and at a political level. I mean, housing and the property market needs to be depoliticized. Actually, it's too much of a political weapon.
Whatever happens, you will always be the greedy developer, the greedy landlord. Whatever program you see, what a Midsummer Murders or whatever, always the baddie is always the man assembling land, or the greedy developer. And that's a perception. And it's, as you say, it's outdated. It's not true. We're there. We're trying to put money back into the economy. We're trying to give people what they want. And I can't give people what they want because they can't get it through a planning process. And inflationary pressures have made some developments just not viable.
What are you seeing on land values at the moment? Have you seen a softening in land prices over the last couple of years, or is it still, or land prices stayed quite stable, and that therefore makes viability of development more challenging?
As with everything, it's location specific, but yeah, I've seen softening of land values. They have to when the planning delays are so much and the cost of building out is so high, and that doesn't appear to be going down at the moment. Yeah, there's a softening of land values, definitely.
So your experience is that build costs are still rising, or certainly haven't softened?
They haven't softened yet. No.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because I've certainly heard mixed messages around that. Obviously, up to probably the early part of last year, they were running at about 20-25% year-on-year build cost inflation. That seems to have, from what I've seen, that seems to have stalled and even slightly gone into reverse, as a lot of contractors find themselves lacking work because of a lack of housing starts.
I think it will filter through.
Yeah.
They'll filter through to us. I mean, our build starts, we've only got one just starting now, which is quite a simple one, a townhouse development for students. And the build price was spot on. It's what we actually thought. It wasn't higher than we thought. It was spot on. And that's a change, because most things come in and you think, really? That's more. Particularly on refurbs. Refurbs, we used to do an awful lot of office to resi conversions. But the regulations, the Building Safety Act 2022 has just made it so expensive.
Yeah. Presumably that's what's driving that. Is that things like sprinklers, secondary staircases, anything else in particular?
Everything, and then getting fire risk assessments is always an interesting exercise on all of our portfolio. The quality of them really does vary, and the scarcity of labor in that profession makes it very expensive. It does feel a bit like the Wild West out there sometimes.
You talk about scarcity of labor. There is a bit of a skills gap that's emerging, and ordinarily that would have been filled by workers from Central and Eastern Europe working on sites. Obviously, post Brexit, a lot of them have chosen to go home. Do you think there's enough being done to help grow and develop skills for younger apprentice tradesmen or tradespeople?
I'm not seeing that. I mean, no. As a company with our portfolio in Germany, we sent guys with like our Wiedersehen pet over to Germany to work on buildings, and then conversely, we sent people from Europe over to the UK to work on our buildings. That was clearly pre-Brexit. We can't do that now, and that was just like a release valve. You thought, well, actually, I can do this cheaper. Send our lads over there to Germany, and we'll bring someone over from Eastern Europe, a gang over to work on a building, and it it kind of leveled prices out, and that's clearly not happening now.
So if you're to contrast your German activities and the UK activities, did you see was the construction cost inflation worse in the UK than it was in Germany? Because in Germany they've got the free market of labour to lean on.
Well, from our perspective, when we first started buying in Germany, which was about 2005, 2006, we always thought it was bloody expensive to do anything in Germany. How much for a bathroom? Bloody hell. But it's always good quality. And I haven't seen prices massively increase as much, because we always thought they were expensive in Germany, and they haven't hugely increased, really. It's been a very stable market for us.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. What sort of what locations in Germany are you active?
We bought our own stock, and we were one of the founders of a fund where we were all over Germany. That was great. I had great fun going over there. Now we sold in Berlin, we sold in Leipzig. We're just around North Rhine-Westphalia, around Dusseldorf, Dortmund, around there. Very stable assets. They're not students, they're multifamily, and I'm not saying they're a boring investment, but they haven't provided any major shocks.
But I mean, I'm looking back maybe 10, 15 years, there was a lot of chat about Berlin being very underpriced relative to even, Eastern European capitals. Berlin real estate stock was very affordable, and then Berlin saw a big surge in the cost of housing. And then that sort of was brought to a big standstill with the introduction of rent control. Was that one of the drivers for you to sell your stock in Berlin or in the east of Germany?
We bought really well, and it was 2006, 2007, and values really went up. And when it came to Berlin, which I love going to, one of my favorite European cities, absolutely fantastic place, and we realized it'd be rude not to sell it, really. The prices have gone so high. We thought, well, hey, we'll take this. And we'd have probably sold a little bit too early, and yields compressed a bit more, but it sort of was a very peaky market, and a very active market for outsiders to buy. For international funds to buy in Berlin, it was easy. When I was buying for the fund and we were going to places like Hamburg, I couldn't get through the Hamburg mafia. No way. Couldn't buy anything in Munich. Just couldn't get anything. We could buy in the sort of the poorer places, Bremen, around there, but couldn't get into Hamburg. But Berlin, very active. There's some great agents there, and I've made some great friends in Berlin.
Yeah, interesting. And then just touching on coming back to the UK for a second, what locations are you most active in? What university towns are you most active in on the student front?
We have been quite active in Nottingham. We've cut back a little bit in Nottingham. We've actually got a loan with Abermore, so I've got to be careful what I say. But it's a brilliant development we've got in Nottingham, right near the Nottingham Trent, and it is absolutely what's needed in the market, and we've fully forward let it. In other areas, Liverpool we see as a growth area, Manchester, Salford we see as growth areas, and Newcastle. We like those locations. I like partnerships. I like working with universities, because I think that's important. We're a long-term investor. We don't flip anything, and we're not a fund. We haven't got a 5-year life, and we have no other shareholders to answer to. So I think from that perspective, when we are talking about a partnership with a university, the universities listen, and they quite like what we do.
So how does it work then? If you can just talk us through how you go about entering into a market. Are you picking up the phone to the university and saying, right, if you got you're basically asking them about their needs and effectively working with them to solve that need? Or do you sometimes have to sort of front on a little bit and sort of if you build it, they will come type of approach?
I think there's so much information now through organizations like StuRents, etc. You can get UCAS, you can get information on individual markets and say, well, this is a good place to invest. And it doesn't have to be a Russell Group university. What normally happens, some of the advice previous to that was only purpose-built student accommodation needs to be built. And if there, like an area like Sheffield, where there's quite a lot of purpose-built student accommodation and probably an oversupply at the moment, but the reason behind that is that when they did the analysis, they didn't look at the amount of houses, because students still like to live in houses. And if you ignore houses in multiple occupation, you get the wrong results, because generally first years live in a purpose-built hall, and then they make their friends, and then they still trot off and find a house. And that still happens in pretty much every area.
Yeah.
And to ignore that market, which previously quite a lot of funds did, is probably a mistake. But there are some areas like Bristol's booming, Glasgow's booming. There's some real peaky areas for student accommodation investment.
Well, I wanted to ask you about Glasgow, because I mean, I know Bristol very well because that's where I was at university. And yes, we, in our second and third years, we lived in a 6-bedroom house share in Clifton. But Glasgow, we're now seeing north of £250 a week rents, which sort of blows my mind, really. That's achievable. I imagine that's probably very, very comparable, if not more expensive than effectively, regular PRS. How do you assess that particular Glasgow market? And especially when I look at the project we've got going on together, I looked at the rents there, and it felt much more sustainable, much more sustainable, much more comparable with something that felt sensible.
I agree, and I don't think it is sustainable, because I mean, looking at students are the poorest member of our society when they're traveling places. Parents that are normally paying, or guardians, etc. It is £200-300 a week is just not sustainable. And it's a lot of some of the newer entrants have really just sort of focused on high-end international students. For that, it's really the Chinese. But that doesn't cater for everyone. And if there was any political sort of instability in Asia, which could be for any reason, and less Chinese came to the UK, that would be a problem. If Trump gets in, that's probably beneficial to us, because less internationals will go to America, we think. But the internationals are a key demographic for student accommodation. There are other internationals, Indians, which have less money, and Nigerians, their currency has been devalued, and they're finding it very difficult to come to the UK.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear that. It sounds to me that actually, as a business model, you've got to focus on a domestic market first and foremost, and provide a product that's affordable for domestic students first of all, and then any excess capacity you can then put international students in there.
That's entirely our business model, absolutely.
Yeah.
In its entirety. We always look at the domestic market. I mean, for universities, the domestic students aren't making them any money. They're losing money on every sort of university domestic student, and making money on the postgraduates, because they can charge 20 plus thousand a year. And there is a funding crisis, and it's interesting to see how it plays out with the Labour government.
Just out of pure interest on my part, what do you think from the student's perspective? What's the trade-off between location and price? Like, how much? I'll put it differently. How far would a student be willing to travel from their accommodation to their lectures, or the union, for example, relative to the discount that they would get for being that bit further away? Like, is there a point where is there a distance beyond which, or a travel time beyond which, a student is going to say, do you know what, we're not having any of this. I don't care how cheap it is. I need to be close to lectures and the union and all the rest of it.
Location wins out always. We wouldn't look at anything more than 7 to 8 minutes walk from a university. typically we want something you fall out of bed during a lecture. And I don't get where there's PBSA built and you've got to get a tram or a bus in. I don't get that. Ultimately, I can't see how that is going to work. Location, I mean, we know, we've been involved in property, it's the 3 Ls, isn't it? And that's where the students will congregate, and they want to be with their contemporaries, and that's why we've got a university quarter, and that's why where all the students live. And you've got to be absolutely next to the university. Then we can put security in to make it a better area, external closed circuit TV and security patrols. They feel safe. That's a big factor. But you really don't want to be getting a bus to university. Different in Newcastle, where you've got an area specifically for students and second and third years live there. That may change over time, because it always migrates to around the university campus. In my experience, always.
Yeah, I guess Newcastle being slightly unique because it's everyone sort of congregates in Jesmond, don't they?
That's right.
Not necessarily knowing Jesmond myself particularly well, but I just reflecting on what you were saying though, because
I'd ignore London as well. London's different.
London, yeah. And I live where I live actually is where Royal Holloway University is, and that in itself has its own kind of slightly weird dynamic too. But if I think about Bristol, I was at Uni of Bristol, which obviously is in the centre of the city, and yeah, I had a sort of 8-9 minute walk to my lectures. But then you had people who were at UWE who are having to drive all the way out to effectively, sort of the M32 junction with the M4. So it's quite interesting. That's one of those sort of unusual ones where the university campus is way outside the town, sort of almost like in a business park location, and people having to go from the centre of town out there. And yeah, I don't think there are many people lining up to live or stay at UWE or near UWE either. So yeah, there will always be unusual instances. Let's change pace a little bit. Let's talk about the origins of, well, basically how you got into the property industry and the origins of Kexgill, how it all got started. Do you want to just give people a little bit of the story as to how we got to where we are today?
Kexgill was set up not by me, set up by Mike Lee in 1978. First generation immigrant to the UK, bootstrap entrepreneur. So everything, he started very slowly, buying the odd house. I met him an awful long time ago when I just qualified as a chartered surveyor, and I told him to get out of student accommodation, get into commercial. He ignored me completely, but we've remained in contact all the time. And then I joined the group 2005, initially to take on Germany. After a health incident, I took over the group 10 years ago, and there are only two main directors. That's myself and Mike. Mike's looks far younger than me, but he's a tad older. And we run the business. I mean, he comes in one morning a week, a very early time, and we speak all the time on WhatsApp and any other sort of emails, etc. But it's a very tight ship, private company. We've resisted private equity investment. It does come along every now and again, and we've sort of thought about it for a couple of weeks and then thought, no, because everybody has a 5-year plan. There's very little long-term money. Our aim is to carry on and have proper succession in the company, and in 25 years it'll still be going. It's not here to be flipped or to be sold.
So can you just talk people through how Mike and then more recently yourself have been able to take the company from effectively startup to a group with a 200 million gross asset value? How does that look? And obviously we're talking about a 40+ year time horizon, but how does that look? And if someone's looking to build a long-term wealth portfolio of property assets, what advice can you give them?
Well, it started slowly because you buy a house, you refinance it, you buy another house. The growth is very slow, but when we had sort of doubling of house prices, tripling of house prices, that creates more equity. I don't foresee that happening in the near future. So it's really buying right, getting the income, always relying on the income, because increases in value doesn't pay the bills. And then you get to a certain size where you think, well, actually, we've probably got too many houses. At one stage, we're the largest owner of HMO student houses in the country. But I certainly 10 years ago thought, well, we need to change. And we've got more PBSA now. I wouldn't buy a student house at the moment because the Renters Reform Act, or the threat of the Renters Reform Act, which doesn't fully take into account student occupation. We did buy 200 houses from a university, but they were all located adjoining the campus, and they're classed as one unit, one hall of residence. So those are the big events. We're looking at quite a big partnership shortly with the Russell Group University. I see that as our future, partnering proper partnerships with like-minded universities, where it's a long-term growth, and where we're looking at rents that will be affordable. If we were looking at rents that aren't affordable, that's not a long-term business proposition.
Is that one of the reasons why the universities want to partner with you, because they ultimately want to keep costs down for the students, presumably as well. The less they have to spend in rent, the more they can spend on tuition, for example. And so I completely see that. And how, when you talk about partnerships with them, are you talking about them effectively saying, look, I need you to house 200 of our students? Can you go and find a building and buy something, or how does it work? What's the
to a similar? Yeah, I mean, it can be. We have a building. We put in the building. You put in the money. We jointly develop it, and then we both own 50% of it. That's a proper partnership. I like that. And we know where the rent is. We can work out the yield. We can work out the finance on it. And moving forward, and if we're not capping the rents, but we're just being reasonable on the rents. We're not putting in cinema rooms and swimming pools and gyms. Why would you put a gym in when there's gyms surrounding campuses? And why would you put in private dining when they don't get used? But I mean, other people would completely criticize that and say, well, yes, they do. We all use them. We put it in, and they have the finest sort of community experience ever. We just want to make really good rooms, really great study places, and not to be charging a rent which ultimately domestic students can't afford.
Well, I suppose that's the other thing, isn't it? That whilst we've seen this explosion in rents in certain locations, and I speak as an investor in commercial property, but you're going to see greater potential for rental growth if you're starting off a lower base rent than if you're starting off a higher base rent. But particularly something like student accommodation, particularly in a sector like student accommodation as well, where ultimately there's always a limit to what anyone can ever spend on rent, whether you're a domestic or international student. So to my mind, that sounds like a good tactic to be, a good tactic to be employing.
I have been criticised by investors. I was on a panel once, and they were saying, Richard, why aren't you using dynamic pricing? Why don't you restrict the beds in a big area and put the rent up? And I've discussed this many times with the chairman, and we just don't do that. Because if you were, for example, when you're a student in Bristol, if you were paying £100 a week, and a late entrant was paying £175 a week, the guy paying £175 a week wouldn't be very happy, and we just couldn't get that. We set the rents that will make us money for the year and pay our bills. We don't put dynamic pricing in. Maybe that's a mistake. But I was going on to dynamic pricing. I looked at UKREiiF. I thought, well, I'm going there on Tuesday. I'm going to stay over. I might stay over in a hotel. And I did that on Tuesday, and the cheapest hotel was £999 for Leeds. Hell, I think I'll commute.
Yeah, it was probably probably a wise decision. Yeah, that's a lot of money to spend a night in Leeds, isn't it? But I think one of the other logical things about not being too aggressive on rent as well is that on charging rent is as well, you're going to be less likely to have delinquency. You know, you're less likely to have delinquent payments, and that's going to make your management easier. So you're going to have to if you have to employ fewer people to go and chase people up for their rental payments, that also makes that also that's a cost saving, isn't it? You know, so one of the downsides of being too aggressive on the charging of rent is because someone may end up committing to a rent that they actually can't afford. And I know you've got guarantors and all the rest of it, and yeah, you'll probably get the money in the end, but
it's a hassle. It's a hassle.
It's a hassle, right?
I remember Opel, which was a student operator, and they halved the rents at one point. They halved the rents. So the people who had signed up for typically £100 a week, their new friends were paying £50 a week. And that made for all sorts of issues. All sorts of issues. It was obviously a desperate measure at the time. I don't fully understand it. And then possibly if they're watching, the former directors of it, they'll probably sue me for saying that, but I do remember it happening.
In terms of taking third party capital, whether it's private equity or some other form of it, what's the main driver for not wanting to take that capital? Is it ultimately a consequence of having grown the business slowly, and that just being part of the business's DNA, or are there any other particular justifications as to why you want to go about operating the business as you do?
Big names come to us, normally via third parties, and it just hasn't. And one of them was saying, well, look, we can give you £500 million a year to spend. I couldn't spend £500 million without buying a load of crap. It wouldn't all be good. And then that's only you're buying on the beginning of a wave. That's what they're hoping. And then in 5 years' time, you bought it, you stabilize it, then you flog it. But that isn't us. And I think I've yet to meet anybody wanting to put money into the business that didn't want it out in 5 years. Maybe I've spoken to the wrong people, but we haven't seen that.
Yeah. So is it really a consequence? So it's really a function of who, rather than a lack of interest or desire to take external capital to grow?
I think we'd take it if generally our appetite is far bigger than our sort of means of expanding. You see a lot of things, you think, I really want that, because we love that. Kind of gives you that thrill of buying something, developing something. So that there's always that conversation to be had, particularly if we're doing more partnerships where those are far more bankable.
Yeah, but it's more sort of, in some ways you want to sort of do it on a deal by deal basis, and
yeah,
you presumably as well, you want the ability that, let's say you're pairing with a private equity fund, the private equity fund who wants their money back after 5 years, you want to be the master of your own destiny, and you want to be able to say, right, okay, well, I want to be either able to buy that off you for an agreed strike price, or if we can't get the price that we're both happy with, you're just going to have to sit in with us for that bit longer. I
think that would be, I think you knocked down. Yeah, that's correct. It's a tough one for us, and we haven't had the right offer. Yeah. And we generally, it's difficult when you've been the master of your own destiny for so long, and you bought things. We had that when we had a fund interest, and we didn't like it. Somebody said, we shouldn't buy that for this reason. You're wrong. You're actually not in Germany. We know it's a good buy. We didn't like that.
Yeah. Well, I suppose one area you could explore is there are certain very well-heeled family offices with slightly more evergreen capital that are very experienced in the UK property sector, and no doubt they probably had you may have had conversations with them, you may not, but certainly there are some that exist that are, shall we say, a bit more patient, and they aren't they aren't bound by fund lifespans. So I'm sure some of them will be listening, or someone who knows them will be listening or watching, and can direct them your way.
Yeah, I had a good conversation at UK REiiF with a sort of a housing growth company. Actually, that is the company. I spoke to them, and that was an interesting conversation. So yeah, I mean, there are possibilities, in particular with our, as I said before, the partnerships with the universities.
So if we're to paint a picture as the the ideal picture for what the next 5 to 10 years look like for Kexgill, what would you say they are?
Partnerships. I firmly believe in real partnerships with the universities where we're both got our aims aligned. We know what we're looking at. We're looking at long-term investments. I see that as the future. And that is the most exciting bit of the future for us. Buying the odd bit here and there and increasing our exposure, yeah, that could happen. But as a real sort of a provider of growth, it would be through proper partnerships.
And if you were to quantify that, would you quantify that in the increased number of beds under management, or would you put that under assets under management? Is there any, what would good look like to you in 5 to 10 years time?
5 to 10 years time, you get to a size, and it's explained to me, you get to sort of getting from 50 million to 100 million takes a long time. Getting from 150 to 200 million takes a little bit less time. It becomes like a snowball rolling down a mountain.
Yeah,
it gets bigger and bigger, and in 5 years time, 300 to 400, is that possible? Probably. So it's that. Then when you get to 500 million, you could look at a float. We're too small now, and we'd need more expertise in.
Yeah. What's your head count at the moment, Richard?
As regards beds, only 3,000 in the UK, and as regards staff, 90 staff.
90 staff.
We do the cleaning, we do the maintenance, we do everything.
And that's all in house. So what's the motivation to not outsource a lot of that? We
outsource in Newcastle because size-wise, it's very small scale. We've always done it that way. We've always been very hands-on, and that's probably a criticism when you look at the accounts. We're quite staff-heavy, but it's kind of our model.
But presumably, as you grow the number of beds, you won't have to grow the headcount in the office.
Yeah, that's right. There's economies of scale. For example, the Abermore one in Nottingham will probably have an extra cleaner. That's it. We've got enough staff there already.
Within the Nottingham area as it is. Yeah. So that's very efficient, isn't it? Because often when people do the analysis on the revenue, the analysis on the revenue, obviously you go, and obviously maybe you can explain it better than I can. Obviously you have your gross revenue, and then you have, and then you have to take off approximately 25% off that to get to your net revenue. But if you've already got a lot of that overhead as a fixed cost, and you're sharing that fixed cost with more revenue, it becomes much more efficient.
So, for example, we bought an ex-Unite building a couple of years ago, 117 beds, no extra staff, just added into the portfolio. Perfect.
So for that, you've got no addition. The only real additional overheads will be the utilities costs, presumably, and council tax rates, that sort of thing. Yeah. That's obviously a very logical way of approaching it. What's, you obviously talked about partnerships. What do you think is the one thing in the student housing sector that people should be talking about but aren't?
That's a good question. Everybody's talking about affordability, but nobody's actually doing anything about it because it's so hard to do it. It's so hard to build something and make it less than £200 a week. It just doesn't work. Everyone is talking about affordability, but finding the way through that maze is interesting. Sorry, I'll just. And so that it is hard. I've just been distracted by a phone. You'll probably have to cut all this out now.
No, don't worry. No, we're going to keep it in. We're gonna keep it in. We like these interruptions.
Yeah.
It shows that it's real and not scripted.
Oh, it's not scripted. Help me.
No, I think that's quite interesting. There's a lot. People pay a lot of lip service. It's a bit like the ESG and the green agenda. There's a lot of lip service paid to it, but actually how much people do about it is still remains to be seen. So talking about affordability, I mean, yeah, we talk about, people talk about affordable housing, whether that's in the regular C3 sector or whether that's in the student sector. When you talk again, we go back to 250, 300 quid a week in Glasgow. That doesn't sound sustainable. It sounds like something that people need to. I say people. I think it's something that the industry needs to look at very seriously and address. But everyone can talk a good game, but you've got to execute on it, haven't you? I think that's
the thing that keeps me going is when I went to Polytechnic, Trent Polytechnic, now obviously Nottingham Trent University. Yeah, when I lived there, I had a fantastic time. It's a real rite of passage. You get out, you meet your best buddies, and you have as you will have done in Bristol. And not to have that, to stay in your home city and commute, you're not going to meet your best mates. You're not going to have that experience. You're not going to have that rite of passage. And I think that's a real shame. And that's what it's getting to now. If you're talking £300 a week, people are going to say, well, I can't afford that. You're going to stay here. You're going to go to your local university. That's a shame. And then you're going to keep your existing mates. You're not going to make new friends because you're going to go home every night, back to your household home.
Well, my kids could walk to Royal Holloway University. It's less than 15 minutes up a reasonably steep hill, but they could probably manage it. I don't think I'd want my kids to go to university here, right? What would they gain? I do feel like if you haven't had that opportunity to go away from home and make that new group of friends, it's and I think this is probably would be most people's experience, is that the most valuable thing about going to university is not the academic, what you learn academically. I mean, the qualifications are, the certification is important. It's why everyone does it. But really what you gain from it is the network and the friends. And, I met my wife, for example, I met my wife at university. Most of my best friends I met at university, particularly Bristol. You miss out on all of that. I say miss out on, maybe that's extreme. I think you have a much lower chance of having those engagements, interactions, if you don't participate in university in that way.
I agree. I mean, from my own perspective, from my own children, they left at 18. We live in a pleasant market town in Yorkshire, Beverley, lovely place to live. Once they'd left at 18, I thought, well, I'm not going to see you again. Obviously, the odd weekend here and there. And it's a migration to where the jobs are. So they're in London, which is great. It's all right when they come back. 2-3 days is fine. Any more than that, yeah, you go
back. guess and fish and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, it's time to start the wind down. So maybe just to ask a few kind of non-work related questions. What's outside of work, outside of student housing and German resi? What's your, what keeps you busy? What do you like to do? How do you like to spend your time?
Well, finally, I'm getting a grandchild at some stage this year, so that's a good thing. That's what as you get older, that's what you look forward to. You want a grandchild, so I'm getting one. Admittedly, be born in London, so it'd be a Cockney. So it's going to be tough. And my work-life balance is absolutely crap. I spend far too much looking at emails and talking, but I kind of quite like my job, so that's a good thing. I used to play golf, but I was crap at it. But I like traveling, apart from when you go away and you nearly die. That's not so good. But yeah, I just like family and friends, and spend far too many weekends lost in the pub.
Lost in the pub. Have you got a dog that you sort of that acts as your excuse to get down to the pub and take him for a walk? And
I live in the centre of a market town, backing onto a pub. I don't need a dog. I could just walk next door, so I don't care.
Well, I guess that's one of the things that probably keeps you sane. I guess is you can go to the pub, have a couple of beers, and
one of the
enjoy
things
the crack.
it keeps me sane. I walk every Tuesday night, which will be tonight, with two grumpy old gits, and we walk. We set walk. We walk for about 5 miles, moaning, swearing, and being really unpleasant. And then we don't even go to the pub, and that's a great outlet for me, and it's a great outlet for them. And we are thoroughly unpleasant to each other and about everything. Liz Truss was never popular. She was very unpopular on our walks.
Very unpopular indeed.
Yeah, extremely unpopular. And that helps me an awful lot. And the other thing I do, I swim every morning in a local municipal baths, which is it's a council-owned baths in Hull, hasn't changed since Edwardian times. You have a little cubicle around the edge, and people are older than me there, and it's just a great place to be at 7 a.m. in the morning.
So despite all that, you are actually quite an active person, and you do have a nice routine to help you keep yourself fit. And by the sounds of things, you're saving a lot of money on therapy as well, or on professional coaching, because you've got your two walking buddies who are there to listen to you.
Thoroughly unpleasant all the time. In fact, one time we thought we're going to be nice to each other, and that lasted for about a minute, and we felt physically sick. And then we get back to insulting each other, and that was much better. It's difficult when people are nice to you; you never trust them.
Now, some of our audience may be too young to remember this TV show, but I'm getting Last of the Summer Wine vibes about you and your companions.
I'm not sure how to take that, but yeah, there is that. I mean,
a younger version of.
I'm glad you
younger
said
versions
version of.
Yeah.
But one of them, a serious job he's had. He's just retired, and so getting his wisdom and saying, "Well, I won't bloody stand for that, Richard. If I were you, I would do this," is very helpful. Very helpful.
No, love that. And in terms of mentorship, obviously you talked about Mike, the founder of Kexgill. I mean, have there been any other people who've been kind of big influences in your career?
Yeah, I mean, well, I've got connected to some business schools, and there's the odd lecturer here and there that they just do things because it's not about money; it's about them doing the right thing, and I find them really inspirational. And the much maligned counsellors, some of them I know personally, and they have a horrible job. Everybody hates them, but they really genuinely care, and they do it because they want a better environment for everyone. And I would struggle to do their job. I couldn't do their job, but they've been quite inspiring because there isn't that sort of monetary thing at the end of it. I mean, you're involved in property, you think, well, I've got to have this and this, and the net asset value's gone up, so that makes me feel better. But even for us, and certainly for our chairman, it's not about money. It ceases to be about money, really. It ceases to be about creating something that will carry on, that will outlive me, and it will certainly outlive Mike.
Yeah, well, from a personal perspective, that I suppose that legacy motivation is something that really resonates for me personally, and I've got a lot of time and a lot of respect for that, frankly. So it's great to hear that. And just like last question, if you had some advice, some guidance to your younger self, and you can pick an age at which that might be relevant to, what would you say to yourself and why?
It's kind of not to me. I mean, I think one of the things that I felt quite strongly about is having empathy, and not thinking that I'm better than anybody else. And I think that I would ask myself the question, who is the most important person in this business? Is it me, or is it the cleaner that goes into a student house that is the first point of contact with the students, that spots when something's wrong? Who's more important? One doesn't exist without the other. And me thinking, yeah, well, actually, the cleaner's more important. And I think having that kind of empathy is important, really. And everyone's got a story. everyone's got a backstory to what's happened in their lives, and trying to making assumptions about people, I try not to, because everyone's interesting, and I genuinely mostly like everybody, apart from Liz Truss. But mention that.
Do you know, it's quite funny that a few weeks after she resigned, I ended up having a coffee in a London hotel bar about 8 feet away from her. And I don't know who she was talking to, but she was having a whale of a time, and she was laughing her head off. And I just thought it was so bizarre and so perverse that, you know, she'd done all that damage to so many people's businesses, and yet there she was, you know, having the time of her life, almost blissfully unaware.
I wish I was there. I wish I was having that coffee with you. I might have had it nipped over and had a quick chat.
I am unfortunately, I'm a bit too conformist and a bit too polite, Richard. Maybe some of us need a sort of uncompromising Yorkshireman like yourself to go and tell her what's what.
You haven't met our chairman, no. He's properly uncompromising.
Okay, well, we'll have to remedy that at some point.
Yeah.
Richard, thank you very much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I certainly feel like it's been very enlightening for both myself and for our audience. If anyone would like to reach out to you and get in touch, maybe they want to give you some evergreen capital to go invest, or maybe they just want to pick your brains on something here or there. What's the best way for someone to reach out and get in touch with you?
LinkedIn, email. My email is. Can I give my email out on this?
It just depends if you want to get spammed. You could just leave it to LinkedIn if you like, or direct people to the Kexgill website. Maybe that might be helpful for you.
The Kexgill Group website rather than the University Quarter, which is all about letting. And our German site, you'd have to do it in German, and that wouldn't work. So yeah, LinkedIn or the email is richard@kexgill.com. I'm sure I'll get a bit of spam, but I don't care.
Okay, all right, nice one. You've got a good filter. That works well. Well, Richard, that's been great. It's been as I said, been an absolute pleasure having a chat and getting to know you. And we'll look forward to speaking to you the next time around. But and to all our listeners and viewers, thank you very much for joining us. We'll catch you on the next one. I've been Michael Dean. I'm at property_funder if you want to reach out to me. And we'll speak to you again soon. Cheers and bye-bye.